Before we begin, take a second to steady your sensors. If you enjoy science fiction where humanity survives not by being the biggest monster in the room but by changing the rules of the room itself, tap like, leave a comment about which alien species you think would fear humans the most, and subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this story. Now let me show you the moment the galaxy realized fear had limits. The Galactic Council chamber was built to intimidate. Its ceiling arched like the ribcage of a dead god, and every seat was positioned so its occupant could look down on every other species present. It was a room designed for predators, empires, and creatures who believed dominance was the same thing as order. Today that illusion was failing. Veilcore stood at the center of the chamber, bound by gravitic restraints that could collapse a cruiser hull. Even restrained, the apex predator made the air feel heavier. His armor-plated hide bore the scars of wars that no longer had names. Entire civilizations had been reduced to footnotes because they mistook him for something that could be controlled. The Council had not made that mistake. They had made a worse one. They had brought him here alive. Veilcore's eyes, cold and ancient, moved slowly across the chamber. He did not snarl. He did not thrash. He did not need to. Every species present knew the truth of him, the living constant of galactic history. When Veilcore advanced, star maps changed. When he withdrew, the void remembered. The predator refuses to submit, hissed a counselor whose species survived by consuming the weak. As expected. He has never submitted, replied another, voice trembling despite centuries of political training. That is precisely why this anomaly matters. The anomaly hung between them on a hollow projection. A ruined human colony scorched to bedrock. Debris fields still drifting. No life signs except one. A small, unmistakable human silhouette, standing in the open. And behind it, towering like a living fortress, Veilcore. The Council had replayed the footage 100 times. They still did not understand it. Hours earlier, Veilcore had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human system, drawn by signals of chaos and prey. Pirates had descended on the colony with the efficiency of scavengers, their weapons indiscriminate. By the time Council observers detected Veilcore's arrival, the predators among them had already begun betting on how long the humans would last. Then the apex predator changed the outcome. Veilcore annihilated the pirates with a precision that unsettled even seasoned war species. He did not pursue fleeing ships. He did not harvest trophies. He ended the threat and stopped. That alone would have been disturbing. What followed was unthinkable. At the center of the ruin, amid shattered structures and cooling fires, a human child stood frozen. Young. Alone. Council analysts identified him as a non-combatant, a statistical inevitability of war. Veilcore approached him slowly, each step calculated. Sensors registered weapon systems primed, then powered down. The child did not run. Veilcore halted. This was the moment the Council could not explain. The apex predator, whose presence alone triggered extinction-level panic responses, simply stood there. He lowered himself slightly, reducing his profile, not in submission but in consideration. The child looked up, eyes wide, hands shaking, and said something the translators could barely process. "Are you done now?" The chamber fell silent as the recording ended. Commander Elias Rourke watched from the human delegation seat, his jaw set, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. He had been planetside when the attack began. He had ordered evacuations, fought through corridors filling with smoke, and made a decision no officer ever forgives himself for. He had sealed a door to save 100 others, believing one child had already been lost. Rourke had spent the hours since then preparing to die in a council chamber that barely acknowledged humanity as a developing nuisance. Instead, he was watching the most feared being in the galaxy stand guard over a boy who should have been dead. Veilcore's gaze shifted, settling on Rourke through the transparent barrier. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Or judgment. Rourke did not look away. He had faced worse odds than this, even if none of them had been quite so large. "The human demands the predator's immediate termination," a counselor announced, misreading the situation entirely. Rourke stood. "No. Humanity demands you don't provoke a war you cannot survive." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Veilcore's restraints tightened in response to rising tension. He did not react. His attention remained fixed on the projection of the child, now sitting amid the ruins, leaning against Veilcore's armored limb as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. For the first time in recorded history, the apex predator had not chosen conquest, slaughter, or withdrawal. He had chosen to stay. The Council saw a threat to their authority. Rourke saw a truth humanity had always known but never articulated to the stars. Strength was not proven by how much you could destroy. It was proven by what you refused to. As the chamber descended into argument and fear, Veilcore shifted his stance, placing his massive form squarely between the child and the watching fleets beyond the system. The message was clear even without words. The galaxy could decide what it wanted to believe next. But whatever came, it would have to go through him first. The first thing the child noticed was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, not the silence of sleep or safety, but the stunned absence that followed violence finishing its work. Fires crackled in the distance, metal cooled and groaned, and above it all loomed the shape that had ended the screaming. Veilcore stood unmoving, his shadow swallowing what remained of the colony square. He had ended wars faster than this heartbeat. He had never waited afterward. The child's name was Jonah. He was old enough to understand when something was wrong and too young to understand when it was truly over. His hands were blackened with soot, his knees scraped raw from falling, but he was alive, which already placed him outside every prediction the galaxy had ever made. He looked up at the towering figure and felt fear arrive late, stumbling over curiosity that had already claimed the front of his thoughts. Veilcore's sensory arrays tracked the child's breathing, irregular but steady. His heart rate spiked then slowed. No weapons. No hidden intent. The apex predator processed threat matrices faster than most species could form language, and the result was a void. The child did not register as prey. He did not register as enemy. He registered as unfinished. Jonah swallowed and shifted his weight. The ground was warm beneath him. "They're gone," he said, unsure if he was stating a fact or asking permission to believe it. Veilcore inclined his head a fraction. The movement displaced dust in a slow wave. The child took that as confirmation. Across the system, Commander Elias Rourke fought his way back through debris and guilt. His evacuation ship had been crippled in the final exchange, forced to limp into a holding orbit while the colony burned below. Every protocol screamed that returning was suicide. Rourke ignored them. He had ignored worse. When he reached the surface, the destruction hit him harder than any weapon. Buildings reduced to skeletons. Streets erased. Names he knew already becoming memories. He moved through the wreckage with his rifle raised, scanning for threats that no longer existed. His comm crackled with council orders to stand down, to await judgment, to accept that the situation was no longer human. Then he saw them. The predator and the child stood at the center of the devastation like a monument no one had commissioned. Jonah leaned back against Veilcore's leg, his small frame dwarfed by armor that had broken fleets. Rourke froze, training and instinct colliding. He had seconds, maybe less, to choose how humanity would be seen next. "Jonah?" he called, keeping his voice low. "Hey kid. It's me." Jonah turned, relief flooding his face. "You're back." Veilcore's posture shifted instantly. Weapon systems spun to readiness, targeting Rourke with a precision that could not miss. The predator stepped forward, placing himself between the child and the approaching human. Not aggressively. Deliberately. Rourke stopped. Slowly he lowered his rifle and set it on the ground. He raised his hands, palms open, exposing the scars that marked him as a soldier who had survived too long to bluff. "I'm not here to hurt him," he said, unsure who needed to hear it more. Veilcore studied the man. This human carried authority without dominance, exhaustion without surrender. His movements were cautious, not fearful. The predator recognized the pattern. A protector approaching another protector. Jonah tugged at Veilcore's armor plating. "He's okay," the child said, as if that settled everything. Something ancient in Veilcore recalibrated. The council fleets arrived moments later, blotting out stars with hulls bristling for war. Orders flowed faster than thought. Containment. Termination. Prevention of precedent. None of them considered negotiation. Apex predators did not negotiate. They were ended or endured. Veilcore felt the weapons lock onto him. He ignored them. His focus narrowed to the small hand gripping his armor and the human standing unarmed before him. This was the choice point the galaxy had never prepared for. Strength demanded action. Power demanded resolution. Veilcore lowered himself to one knee. The motion sent shockwaves through the watching fleets. Council chambers erupted into chaos. The apex predator, undefeated, unbroken, had altered his posture not for surrender but for access. He brought himself low enough for Jonah to step away safely, to reach Rourke without fear of falling or being crushed by proximity. Jonah hesitated only long enough to look back. "You're staying, right?" Veilcore did not answer with words. He remained where he was. Rourke pulled the child into his arms, the relief almost knocking him to his knees. He held Jonah tightly, aware of the countless targeting systems recalculating around them. When he looked up again, he met Veilcor's gaze. There was no triumph there. No threat. Only resolve. "This ends with all of us alive," Rourke said quietly, not as a plea but as a statement of intent. Veilcor rose, turning his massive form outward, placing himself between the human survivors and the galaxy's combined might. For the first time since his name had been whispered in fear, he chose defense over dominance. The Council would have to respond. And whatever choice they made next would echo far beyond this ruined world. The Council's fleets hung in orbit, a sea of steel and firepower calculated to crush the impossible. Weapons arrays hummed, shields powered, and targeting algorithms tracked the predator and the child below. Analysts across species had already deemed the outcome inevitable. The apex predator would either strike first or be destroyed. They had not accounted for Veilcor's choice. Commander Rourke adjusted his stance, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders like a collapsing star. He could not tell the Council what he saw because they would not understand. This was not weakness. This was strategy. He had spent his life teaching soldiers to fight, to kill, to survive. But now survival depended on understanding what no training could fully prepare him for. Jonah clung to Rourke's side, small and fragile, yet tethered by courage neither could measure. The boy's gaze followed the predator, absorbing every subtle movement, every micro-adjustment of Veilcor's armor. Jonah's instinctive understanding of threat and safety was a secret language shared only with the being that had spared him. He did not speak, but his presence anchored the apex predator in a way that surprised even Rourke. Veilcor shifted his stance, repositioning himself so that Jonah could step forward without crossing hazardous debris. Each movement was deliberate, precise, a blend of predatory grace and protective intent. The child approached cautiously, reaching out to touch a clawed limb. Veilcor lowered his head, allowing the gesture, acknowledging a bond that transcended species and expectation. The Council, observing remotely, had no framework to interpret this. Rourke spoke, his voice steady despite the tension. "He's not attacking. He's guarding. Not just the boy but all of us, if we respect his choice." The predator's optics swept the horizon, scanning the orbiting armadas. Calculations and tactical matrices ran, probabilities evaluated, systems aligned, yet Veilcor did not strike. Every fleet commander anticipated aggression, but none had measured patience. In the predator's mind, defense was superior to annihilation. It was calculated, deliberate, a demonstration of dominance without destruction, a paradox no council had prepared for. Jonah moved closer to Rourke, holding his hand out toward the predator. The gesture was a bridge across incomprehensible scales, a human assertion of trust. Veilcor considered the action, the choice, the potential outcome. Then he knelt, lowering his immense bulk in a silent offering. This time it was not only protection, it was invitation. The child stepped past, confident now in the predator's restraint, and Rourke followed, every nerve aware that any misstep could trigger catastrophe. The Council erupted in debate. Orders, counter-orders, threats broadcast across the quantum net. Fleet admirals demanded immediate strikes. Legalists argued that precedent must be maintained, apex predators bow to no one. Philosophers and xenologists protested, their voices drowned in panic. But on the ground the dynamic was simple. Veilcor had chosen the parameters, and no external calculation could override them. Rourke placed himself between the child and the predator. "We need to communicate," he said, voice low but firm. "Not with words, not yet. We need to show the Council that this is not defiance, it's decision." Jonah's gaze was fixed on Veilcor, unblinking, absorbing the subtleties of posture, the weight distribution, the way his armor flexed as if alive. The predator turned his head slightly, acknowledging the command. There was no sound, no roar, no intimidation beyond the natural gravity of presence. Yet the effect was absolute. The fleets hesitated, sensors recalibrating, algorithms faltering as predictions failed. Veilcor's restraint created a vacuum in their calculations. He was capable of total annihilation, yet chose inaction. The paradox sent waves of uncertainty through the Council's ranks. What did it mean when the apex predator, undefeated and feared across generations, placed its choice above instinct? Rourke crouched slightly, drawing Jonah closer. "This isn't just survival," he whispered. "It's a demonstration. If the Council understands, they may not strike. If they don't, we'll adapt." The child nodded, eyes bright but steady. Jonah's courage was raw, unshaped by politics or war. It was instinct, pure and simple. He knew that Veilcor's presence was protection, not threat. That understanding rippled outward, imperceptible to observers but absolute in effect. Veilcor's form shifted again, aligning directly between the boy and the nearest orbital weapons platform. Every movement, every micro-adjustment of his stance, spoke volumes without sound. This was not surrender. It was assertion of choice. He was still the apex predator. He was still the force of nature every fleet had feared. Yet now he was anchored to a new principle: defense of the vulnerable by will alone. A pulse ran through the council, a ripple of panic and fascination. Human diplomats whispered in shock. Other species recalculated their strategies. Veilcor had redefined the rules. Submission was irrelevant. Obedience was optional. The galaxy would have to account for this anomaly. Rourke took a steadying breath. He won't strike unless we force him to. That's the leverage we have. We protect the boy, we respect his choice, and we survive. That's the reality now. The child, Jonah, reached out and touched the predator's forearm. Veilcor lowered his head further, a gesture of recognition and trust. At that moment, the apex predator was not a weapon, not a terror. He was a guardian, a sentry, a living testament to the unexpected strength of humanity's bond. The council could still act. They could still fire. But Veilcor's posture had changed the conversation irreversibly. The galaxy had never seen the apex predator kneel for anything, and certainly never for a human child. The fleets lingered in orbit, uncertainty rippling like storm clouds over open water. Rourke shifted his weight, keeping the boy close. He did not look at the council broadcasts. He only observed the predator, whose presence was an immovable shield. And he understood that whatever came next, the first choice had already been made. Veilcor would guard. Veilcor would endure. The galaxy would have to reconcile with a predator that obeyed no one, yet served a cause far greater than itself. Jonah smiled faintly, the smallest hint of wonder crossing his face. It was a gesture so human, so impossibly fragile, and yet so powerful. Veilcor lowered his head to meet it. In that silent, impossibly profound exchange, the child had affirmed the predator's choice, and the predator had accepted it. The fleets remained poised for action. The council teetered on the edge of panic, but for those on the ground, the battle had already been decided. Veilcor would not yield, and humanity had gained a protector who did not bend, did not fear, and did not forget. The stage was set. The galaxy would have to watch and wait. And somewhere deep in the child's chest, a new understanding took root. Courage was not defined by firepower, but by who you could trust to stand between you and annihilation. The council chambers were in chaos. Every species represented clamored over protocols, treaties, and ancient laws, but no argument could reconcile the impossible image projected from orbit. An apex predator, undefeated for centuries, kneeling not in defeat, but in protection of a human child. Every mind in the galaxy that had ever feared Veilcor now faced a dilemma they were ill-equipped to process. Admirals barked orders, expecting compliance, expecting obedience, expecting the predator to respond in the only way the galaxy had ever known. But Veilcor's actions had redefined the terms. He had chosen defense over dominance, restraint over destruction, and the simple act of kneeling created a paradox that no fleet computer, no legal framework, no philosophical doctrine could reconcile. On the ground, Commander Elias Rourke adjusted his position, feeling the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. Every fleet in orbit could obliterate everything beneath them, yet Veilcor's presence was an unspoken veto. The predator had absorbed the threat without retaliating, had read the intent in the humans' hearts and chosen a path that defied expectation. Rourke understood that humanity's survival hinged not on firepower, but on the predator's judgment, and he would need to honor that judgment if any of them were to leave this system alive. Jonah clutched at Rourke's arm, his small fingers brushing the hardened edge of Veilcor's armor. The child's eyes, wide with awe, reflected the enormity of the moment. He could sense, instinctively, that the predator was no longer merely a force of nature, but a deliberate force of protection. This bond, fragile yet unshakable, carried the weight of entire worlds. It was trust formed across species, across fear, across everything the galaxy had assumed impossible. The predator shifted, moving into a position that blocked the child entirely from view of the fleet's orbital weapons. His head tilted slightly, scanning every vector, calculating every trajectory. No system was overlooked, no angle unobserved. Veilcor had not acted out of mercy. He had acted from principle. Protection, he understood, was its own form of power, and he wielded it with precision. Rourke's voice was low but commanding. We cannot force him and we cannot provoke him. If we move carefully, we survive. If we panic, we die. That is the reality we face. The council reacted with outrage. He violates all laws, one senator shouted. He challenges authority. Terminate him at once. Terminate what? Another countered. You would destroy the apex predator of the galaxy for choosing to guard a child? For respecting a life that is human? Debate raged, but every analysis loop returned the same result. Veilcourt's choice had created an unassailable position. Any fleet strike would risk escalation to annihilation. Any attempt to remove him physically would likely fail. The galaxy had not built contingencies for this scenario. The Council's authority, so long absolute, now teetered on the edge of irrelevance. On the planet's surface, Rourke scanned the horizon, noting the precision with which Veilcourt moved to shield them. Every adjustment, every flex of armor, was a silent communication. The apex predator had the situation contained, and humanity's role was to respect it. Rourke realized that the predator's restraint had bought them more than time. It had bought them agency. Jonah stepped forward slightly, testing the invisible boundary Veilcourt had established. The predator's massive form shifted in response, just enough to keep the boy safe. There was no threat in the movement, only recalibration. For Jonah, it was affirmation. The predator's decision was deliberate, not instinctual. For Rourke, it was confirmation. Humanity's survival depended on recognizing power where it mattered most, not in weapons but in choices. A distant fleet commander, unable to comprehend the scenario, attempted a strike. A pulse fired, targeting the position they assumed was vulnerable. Veilcourt reacted instantly, intercepting with a controlled displacement that neutralized the attack without destruction. The demonstration was clear. Aggression would not yield results. Strength was measured not by destruction inflicted, but by the capacity to contain it. Rourke exhaled, tension slipping slightly from his shoulders. He's not just guarding the child, he said. He's guarding all of us, but only as long as we respect his rules. The galaxy is learning that survival has a new definition. Jonah's hand brushed Veilcourt's limb, a gesture simple yet profound. The predator lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement, a silent promise. As long as the boy lived, the apex predator's protection would remain unwavering. It was a moment of clarity that defied fear and reshaped every calculation in orbit. The Council could no longer debate protocol. Their fleets paused, officers recalculated, and analysts attempted to retrofit logic onto a scenario with no precedent. Veilcourt had established a new hierarchy, not submission to power but adherence to principle. It was a hierarchy the galaxy had yet to understand, and one it could not challenge without risking annihilation. Rourke glanced at Jonah, whose small form exuded courage that belied his years. We follow him, Rourke whispered. Not because we have to, but because he shows us the way. The child nodded, eyes fixed on the predator, and for a fleeting moment, the horror of destruction receded. What remained was something stronger, something the galaxy had never expected. A bond forged not by dominance, not by conquest, but by deliberate choice. Veilcourt shifted once more, placing his body directly between the orbiting fleets and the human pair. The message was undeniable. Any act of aggression would pass through him first. The Council, for all its history, was confronted with a reality it could not command. The apex predator had chosen. The galaxy would have to respond. Above the chaos, a single understanding emerged. Power without discipline destroys, but discipline without compassion is hollow. Veilcourt embodied both, and in doing so, the predator had rewritten the rules of engagement for every species that dared measure humanity by its weapons rather than its will. Rourke adjusted his stance, Jonah close at hand, and together they understood the next truth. The Council could delay, debate, and deliberate, but the apex predator would not. He had made his choice. He would guard. He would endure. The galaxy would have to bend to that reality, or shatter trying. The fleets lingered, frozen between fear and uncertainty, and on the planet below, the child and the man stood beneath the guardian whose presence alone had rewritten the story of survival. The moment had passed, but its consequences were only beginning. The galaxy would remember this day, not for the wars fought, but for the predator that refused to bow, except for the life it had chosen to protect. Years had passed, yet the image remained indelible across the galaxy. Veilcourt kneeling in the ruin of a human colony, a child at his side, unshakable and unmatched. Stories of that day had spread faster than fleets could navigate hyperspace. Humans spoke of courage tempered with compassion. Other species whispered of the apex predator who had bent neither knee to counsel nor weapon, but had bowed for the first time in his existence, not in submission but in purpose. Commander Elias Rourke had aged with the weight of his decisions, the lines in his face deeper from every night spent wondering if the galaxy could comprehend what he had witnessed. He had guided Jonah into adulthood, watched the boy grow into a young man whose courage and intellect had begun reshaping human diplomacy and strategy. They had never forgotten Vale Core, whose presence lingered like a shadow and a shield, both silent and patient. Rourke had learned that leadership was not always about command, but about recognizing forces beyond comprehension and aligning with them. Jonah, now a man, bore the quiet authority of someone who had survived the impossible and earned the loyalty of a being no one dared approach. He carried himself with the confidence of one who had stood beside a living legend, and yet his humility anchored him to the reality that strength was never measured in fear alone. He understood instinctively what others struggled to grasp. Vale Core's protection was not optional, but it was conditional upon respect, trust, and recognition of value beyond physical prowess. Vale Core, still undefeated, remained an enigma. He no longer roamed the galaxy as a harbinger of destruction, but as a sentinel whose choices dictated the safety of the worlds he observed. His armor bore the marks of centuries, each scar a story, each dent a reminder that survival demanded precision as much as strength. His gaze, once a weapon, had become a beacon of judgment, assessing those who approached, determining if they understood the terms of engagement. Life respected, power restrained, trust honored. A crisis had arisen on the fringe of human-controlled space. A coalition of mercenary fleets, emboldened by rumors that Vale Core was no longer the terror he had once been, attempted to raid a fledgling colony. Their intelligence failed to account for history, for the memory of a predator whose patience was as legendary as his wrath. Jonah stood on the observation deck, Rourke at his side, and watched the sensors light up with incoming signatures. Vale Core descended from hyperspace like a shadow falling across the stars. His approach was deliberate, calculated to warn, not destroy, yet every fleet commander sensed the inevitability. The first shots were fired, and the predator moved with terrifying precision, neutralizing weapons without loss of life. Ships were disabled, not shattered. Hulls were impaled, not destroyed. Every maneuver communicated restraint, control, and an undeniable truth. The apex predator had redefined engagement. Jonah felt the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He had grown into a man capable of strategy, but even he could not fully anticipate the choices Vale Core would make. The bond forged in childhood had evolved into a partnership unspoken yet absolute. Vale Core responded not to orders but to presence, to intent, to the understanding that human lives were not resources. They were catalysts for demonstrating a principle older than war itself: protection above all. Rourke's voice cut through the tension. "Remember what he showed us," he said. "Strength isn't conquest. Strength is choice. Every action counts, but the weight of restraint is what defines power." As the battle escalated, Vale Core executed a maneuver no one could have predicted. He positioned himself between the human ships and the mercenary fleet, creating a living blockade. The predators among the enemy forces hesitated, scanning for openings, calculating aggression that could be met with annihilation. Vale Core's presence alone created a stalemate. The galaxy had never witnessed a predator wielding patience as effectively as power. Jonah's hand brushed the control panel, a gesture more symbolic than functional, as if affirming the partnership that had begun years ago in ruin and silence. Vale Core acknowledged it in turn, lowering his head slightly. That single movement spoke volumes. The predator's loyalty endured, his choice immutable, his judgment absolute. Rourke watched the standoff, understanding that the climax was not measured in destruction, but in recognition. The enemy fleet had two options: retreat or face a force beyond comprehension. They chose survival, disengaging with speed and precision, aware that aggression against a predator of Vale Core's magnitude was no longer a gamble, but a certainty of loss. The dust of conflict settled, revealing the colony intact, lives preserved, and the apex predator still standing guard. Jonah stepped forward, placing his hand on Vale Core's armored limb. There was no fear now, only respect, understanding, and the knowledge that this alliance, born in devastation, had endured. Rourke exhaled, allowing a rare smile to break through the tension. "The galaxy will remember this," he said. "Not for the war we avoided, but for the choice that changed everything." Vale Core lowered his massive form into a stance of repose, knees bent, gaze sweeping the horizon. For the first time in centuries he did not stand to dominate or destroy. He stood as witness, as sentinel, as guardian. The apex predator, feared by all, had chosen to kneel, not in submission but in unwavering purpose. Jonah looked up at him, eyes reflecting both the weight and the wonder of what they had survived. "We're safe," he said softly. Veilcor's head dipped slightly in affirmation. In that motion was a promise that transcended time and species: protection for those who deserved it, judgment for those who challenged it, and the certainty that courage, however small or human, could reshape the universe. The galaxy watched and remembered. Tales spread of a human child who had survived against impossible odds, of a man who understood power beyond the battlefield, and of the apex predator who had chosen guardianship over destruction. The legend endured not because of firepower or terror, but because humanity and its allies had proven that strength without restraint is meaningless, and restraint wielded with wisdom is unstoppable. Above the colony, Veilcor shifted, casting a shadow that was at once awe-inspiring and comforting. The predator, undefeated in war and unparalleled in fear, had found a reason to kneel. The galaxy would never forget that day, the day choice became might, the day courage reshaped destiny, and the day the apex predator and a human child together redefined what it meant to be truly unstoppable.